so we'll begin this by just sort of taking the pulse of where the industry is right now. Again, each one of our panelists has a very specific and different lens they look at the industry through. So I'll ask everybody to introduce themselves, tell us, where you're coming from and where, in your view, the industry is, markets, technology, et cetera, right now.
Okay, I'll start.
Yes, please, Walter.
Well, I'll give first a little bit of my background, and then I'll say only one or two sentences about where I think the industry is, because I want to hear from everybody.
Yes.
Well, I'm a research scientist by training, a behavioral neuroscientist, and I've had the pleasure of being involved both in the tech sector, the research sector, and the education sector. My focus over the last 30 years has been medical applications of virtual reality. I do some basic research at Stanford now on how VR can be applied to medical problems, but I've also been involved in seeing this industry emerge over the last few decades, and as you can imagine, I'm particularly excited about the stage we are right now. In terms of where I think things are going, I think things are about to explode. I recently was over in China, and I see the billions of dollars that both government and private industry are investing in VR as the next, not just computer platform, but interaction platform. I've met with a lot of the funders and large companies that are working here. Chris can talk about HTC's efforts, but it's Apple, Sony, Google, Samsung, Microsoft. All the major tech companies are spending huge amounts of funds, not just on the HMDs, but the other technologies, AI, robotics, smart avatars that are part of this. So I think it's going to be a confluence of, we've got the installed infrastructure of broadband and smartphones, and things are just about to explode. So that's why I'm very enthusiastic.
Fabulous. Mike?
So I've been trying to find good ways to apply emerging technology to learning for about 40 years. Emerging technology 40 years ago was like time sharing and then personal computers. And VR, I met Jaron Lanier 30 years ago, actually, and he just had his visual programming language on the cover of Scientific American. And I've been waiting ever since. And lately I've been working with a company based in San Francisco that does over 1,000 interactive 3D models for STEM science learning. And that's my favorite selfie. They've got AR on the iPad. That's a model of the human face, and its focus is the salivary glands, but you can see all the muscles and stuff. They have the same thing with dinosaurs and DNA, so forth. It's great for the kids. And I'm writing lesson plans for them, actually, where the kids get to stand next to dinosaurs, or, and they're working with HTC to do VR experiences with the Vive, and it's really exciting. The videos you get back from these kids that have just been swimming with great white sharks, and they talk about that experience, or have been flying around the International Space Station. So for me, it's finally here. I think it's here because, well, Mark Zuckerberg paid $4 billion for Oculus, and so everybody all of a sudden said, gosh, this stuff must be worth something. But it's interesting to me because the price points make it possible, for example, for 100 California school libraries, K-12 school libraries, to have VR setups in their libraries and bring the kids for field trips to see things that they would never otherwise see. And that's really exciting to me.
Yeah. Chris?
Yeah, so HTC, as you guys probably know in hardware, has played in the smartphone space, and about 2 years ago we had a coming out party launching the Vive as a kind of a developer kit. And I think VR, as both Michael and Walter have been in it for 30 plus years, it's taken a few different iterations to kind of get started. But I think we're finally here. I think that we've kind of gotten to the point where the technology is in place. We have the PC power that can process the graphic rendering, and we have 90 frames per second, which combined with motion tracking and positional tracking allows you to really feel truly immersed without any vertigo or dizziness. So we're kind of at the stage now where, as Walter was saying, a confluence of events have taken place, and virtual reality is really kind of here to stay. And speaking, kind of echoing what Michael was talking about, when Mark Zuckerberg drops a few billion, people pay attention. So we know, we've been out here, we're still actually in year 0 of the HTC Vive, to be honest. We are about 3 weeks away or 2 weeks away from actually having our first year anniversary of launch, so it's pretty exciting. And we've seen just a tremendous amount of traction in everything from, of course, games to entertainment to healthcare, education, enterprise, including manufacturing, design, collaboration, real estate. So it's really kind of taken hold in a way that I don't think anyone's really anticipated. The analysts always had their own numbers, but we've seen things evolve very differently. And just the fact that, they will be VR headsets in the Vives in 100+ California libraries coming very soon just shows that, again, we're at the very beginning stages of democratization of VR and AR, and that's going to be really taking both consumer as well as enterprise by storm.
Wow. Well, Walter, you mentioned all of the big companies are getting into the act, and of course HTC is one of the anchors there. Given that we are at a hardware conference with a lot of startups, what about the newcomers? I mean, is there any white space there? I mean, is there going to be an industry standard, or is it still up for grabs? I mean, and where are these new inflection points?
I think the best analogy I can give is the 300 baud modem. Do you guys remember that? Where we could see something happen, a web page slowly loading, and we thought, maybe someday I'll be able to not only buy an airline ticket, but look at my destination and maybe see if friends, well, actually we weren't even imaginative enough to know all the things that could happen. And I think that's where we are right now. There's thousands of startups that are nosing around this area. There is a lot of unexplored territory, and it's, well, first of all, I'm curious about the audience. How many of you have had an immersive AR or semi-immersive? Almost everybody. And the fact that we labeled this meeting, this session, the AR, VR, we didn't say augmented reality, virtual reality, we said AR, VR. People know what it means now. And so we're just starting. And I think there's a need for better interaction. There's a need for combinations of robotics and AI and smart avatars with the enabling technology. So it's sort of the Wild West right now. And if you guys are looking how to migrate into it or get started into it, it's a wide open opportunity. And there's a lot of money available too in terms of financing too, I've noticed.
Chris?
Yeah, so I would say that there's from a hardware standpoint, right? HTC is a hardware manufacturer, right? We develop smartphones, we developed smart tablets, and certainly now VR headsets. So in partnership with Valve, we have we're using the Steam VR tracking system, which allows very innovative ways to embody and really kind of augment, if you will, virtual reality with things like motion controllers, of course, your headset, and we have something called the Vive Tracker. So if you think about the Vive Tracker, what it does is it allows you to kind of attach any peripheral and make that into a VR device, a VR scene device, if you will. So I think if you start thinking about the innovation that you can do with the tracker, you can extend that to many other ways. So there's a lot of different hardware applications and use cases we can see, not just with accessories, but with everything else. I mean, we are, again, really early on. There's a lot of innovation, and we have a program called ViveX, which is an accelerator program in 4 of our offices, San Francisco, Beijing, Shenzhen, and Taipei. And it's basically a $100 million fund that we've really kind of invested in to help incubate and accelerate startup companies in the VR space, whether it be software, content, tools, platforms, or hardware. And one of the things that kind of actually came out of the ViveX Accelerator program in Shenzhen specifically, because that's where the manufacturing and hardware companies are typically allocated to and based in, is a wireless company called TPcast. So they've actually been able to enable the Vive in a wireless setting. So there's an accessory attached to your headset, and now you're tether-free, which is very liberating. It works really well, and I know they've done. They're kind of in the midst of ramping up the production right now. I think for later in the year they'll be launching.
Here in the U.S.?
Both U.S. and China. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Michael, what has to happen hardware-wise, for this technology really to be far more ubiquitous in the education space?
Well, hardware-wise, I
Yes.
think it's price point.
Okay.
And the thing that's encouraging about this 100 public school libraries program is that people are getting the idea that it can be like in the days of computer labs, where you didn't have to have, right now everybody talks about one computer per kid, right? But in the old days, they had hell, at Stanford in the 80s, I had a room full of Macintoshes, you know, and a room full of Nextbox cubes, and people came to use them. But I think the thing that's more important, and that's what was interesting to me about some of the folks that I met at lunch, is that it's really professional development. Teachers, even early adopters, need to understand why they should take the time out to integrate a new technology into their practice. And that's what is so much fun about the stuff that I'm doing now, is we're seeing great results from the kids. And we're seeing that the technology, the hardware and software, is getting to the point where it's easy for a teacher to learn to use. So.
I do have one white space thing that I would love to see more help with. Right now, VR is not very social. If you do get into a social experience, the nonverbal communication, facial expressions, body language isn't translated very well. People look very robotic. It's hard to have emotional rapport with someone else in a virtual environment right now. So better ways of putting not just our hands and our legs into a virtual environment and having us be able to do things that way, but better ways of communicating our tone of voice, our facial expressions, mapping that into our avatars. That's a big opportunity.
So what have you, I mean, this sort of is in line with a whole empathy movement in technology as well. And so how do you incorporate that right now? I mean, you've got these headsets. It's very, very hard. I mean, you can't do facial tracking with a large headset. So how can you incorporate, I mean, what technologies or software components would allow for that, increased social interaction or really emotional interaction?
Well, capturing with either cameras or EMG sensors, the movements of the face, listening to the tone of voice and conveying that. Maybe a camera to capture the rest of the body and its positions and doing some quick interpretation of that. The other thing that's missing is haptic feedback. We don't have much in the way of that right now. There's some glimmerings of that, but...
Have either of you seen anything in the sort of sensor or haptic area as well that really kind of is a harbinger to what we can expect as far as a real shift in incorporating this?
I mean, I think you're seeing, eye tracking technology, so Fove and Tobii and other things where they're being embedded or incorporated into headsets. And I think you combine that with, Walter mentioned you can have some sensor components built in to measure kind of facial expressions. Or I see it on the software side where people are actually taking voice and language and in combination with positional tracking, using that to kind of almost deduce what the emotion is. So you get kind of the empathy there. But from a haptic standpoint, I mean, again, year zero, we have these controllers. People love them, some people don't love them, some people like other controllers. And they have a little bit of vibration, and so it actually feels somewhat immersive. You're seeing now, again, gloves, and I've seen very interesting robotic type gloves that are really intended to be very, provide that haptic feedback, provide that kind of very sensory experience that we are touching something. If you're, let's say, performing a training in surgery, for example, it would be that level of precision. We're not there yet, we're getting there. But again, that requires innovation, I think, and kind of just this kind of audience to really kind of think about what are those use cases. Body suits, all kinds of things right now where, again, you're seeing different levels of innovation. Even, I think, from a haptic standpoint, there's the ultrasonic solution that I've seen. So if you have, if you're putting your hand in a certain place, there are these ultrasonic waves that actually give your sensation to your hands. So it's actually, there's some really interesting things going on right now.
There's actually one for taste, too.
Yes, the taste,
that stimulates
the smell.
the taste buds.
It smells the other one.
Yeah. Another area that we really would love to see the price come down, and more consumer versions is more sort of the cave type of environments, like little pop-up tents or domes, or so you don't have to have something on your head. It would be great if the three of us could be in a little room where we could interact with each other or other people in a virtual environment where we're capturing our motion, but we don't have to have something on our face.
So, I mean, do you think that the technology and the software, clearly the software would be different, but would the technology be different for different verticals? So, you know, what other verticals besides gaming and, of course, education, do you anticipate there to be a real boom in VR adoption, VR, AR adoption? And how does the technology, the actual hardware, need to be sort of optimized or customized for those verticals?
So I think right now you see semblance of that already. I mean, you see some very dedicated AR companies, and some VR companies are focused on, for example, vocational training. So if you imagine training welders how to weld, there are certain systems out there that let you do that. And I think with the Vive, you do have that flexibility with the tracker. We've seen things where you do firefighting training with very haptic feedback, and you actually have a jacket, a fireman's or firefighter's jacket that heats up when the flame gets bigger. So it really does feel, and the hose actually gives a lot of resistance. So in terms of, you know, the ubiquitousness, I think, of what's out there right now, you can actually apply what's there currently. And over time, there will be a specialization, right? But I think some of that's going to be driven by the industries themselves. So I think from a growth standpoint, we see a lot of adoption in manufacturing and design. I mean, that is a big one. You can think about just automotive companies, aerospace, anyone doing design in 3D. It's much more intuitive to have a 3D representation of the model you're designing and collaborating around, as opposed to mouse and keyboard and flat screen. It's almost the same way with kind of on the medical side, right? With looking at CT scans or anything with X-rays. These are 2D slices of a 3D object. So what's more intuitive, actually seeing it and experiencing it in 3D, or actually looking at it slice by slice? And I would argue it's the former. Right? It's really kind of being there in 3D. So I think the collaborative nature that you're starting to see now, and we have many partners who are already doing this in the automotive space and the, like I said, the design space. And I'll do a little plug. We'll be launching something on Monday as part of Vive Studios, which actually helps bring really showcase content into VR, but that's focused on kind of the designer, the maker, creator type education market, and also can apply to the designer more industrial as well. So,
Verticals?
I think one thing that for sure is, do you remember back in the 90s, everybody was saying, especially investors, what's your internet play? I think everybody in this room needs to think, what's their AR, VR play? Because it's going to impact your industry either at a design, manufacturing, implementation, training, or enterprise level. We have to plan for it.
I mean, what do you think in education? I mean, are we still at the sort of novelty phase, or are we at this sort of inflection point in the adoption where you know, the way we go about things in these verticals, such as training and industrial training, is really going to significantly change with this technology?
Well, simulations are basically the most cost-effective way to train, and immersive simulations are demonstrably more effective. The thing that I think that we haven't really talked about is just science. You know, it's engineering and design. It's already happened. I mean, it's been in the auto industry forever, but I think we're at the point now where people will, I mean, I sat at lunch with one of the ANSA people, and he was telling me how robust their $50,000 software physics emulator was, and what it could emulate explosions. So you put that in VR, and what you get is science that you can't even do with an electron microscope.
Wow. So we've got a lot of entrepreneurs. How many of you are entrepreneurs here wow, okay, great. How many of you are in the VR, AR space? Oh, how many of you are thinking about going into the AR, VR space? Okay, great. Well, let's talk about business models. What is the opportunity? I mean, how do you get into this? Or how do you partner with this space if you are in robotics or sensors or wearables? I mean, what is the business model? Is it going to be direct to consumer? Is it going to be B2B? Is it a combination thereof? I mean,
Yes.
how do you make money in this space? Everything, okay.
But I think,
So I just got this ring for the back of my phone. Now, I've had a much inferior one for a year. This is a great one for a whole lot of reasons. The guy back there is the guy who makes it. I promise you that 10 years ago, when Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone, he not only did not imagine that this would happen, he would have, I mean, he's probably spinning in his grave, because I remember trying to convince him to put handles on the next cube, and he just thought that was the most disgusting idea of his beautiful, perfect cubic design. Well, so Chris is saying that there are a lot of ways to put other things on the Vive and make them work. So I think that's kind of, you kind of coattail with the guys who are out there with all the primary hardware, and you make their stuff that much better for the end user, and then they'll put it on their phone.
I think the other thing to keep in mind is, just as we should be thinking about what our AR, VR play is, all the major companies out there, all the large companies have teams trying to figure out what their AR, VR play, whether it be the entertainment industry. In the medical arena, I guarantee you every medical device company, every pharmaceutical company is trying to figure out how it's going to be applied to them. And that's where the entrepreneurs can come in, as they can come up with the enabling technology that bridges what's already there and how it needs to migrate to this new enabling technology. So I think just as you pointed out, here's a little thing that can extend the use of an existing device. Everything's out there. And I also think we're going to be surprised. I think with smart car technology, those are the perfect room for a VR. And we're going to be sort of bored as we go on our hour drive and not be driving. So I think we're going to see somebody's going to make VR systems for your car. And maybe be able to do your job there. So we don't know yet, but it'll be interesting.
So how open are the established players to innovation from outside, to, either in content or in hardware, in bundling?
Yeah, so kind of where HTC comes from is we recognize the fact that we're early on again in this third generation of VR, if you will. And so the whole approach we'd like to take is to try to really help build the ecosystem. And this is why we've gone into content, we've gone into acceleration programs with ViveX. We have an app store now for distribution called VivePort, which is really intended to help developers and content creators to have another way and distribution channel to sell your content. And so we are very always open to partnering with hardware companies, technology, content, anyone really who's interested in helping the ecosystem build. And again, we're very open to that, and we don't really take kind of an exclusivity view, but by that anyway. So if you want to work with other partners, we're always happy to partner with folks to help everyone. So it's not a closed system by any means, and that's kind of what has really cemented our relationship with Valve as well. So Valve is a very open company. They always are not looking for exclusivity, and we're the same way. But we really recognize that it's challenging for startups out there. So we talk to startups in this room who are looking to launch a VR camera into space, for example, which will be really amazing when that happens. And we're trying to support all these efforts in whatever ways we can.
So, there's this industry sort of support, both as far as funding, because there are a number of venture funds that are really exclusively focused on VR at this point, as well as large corporations, as well as the partnering opportunities. What do you guys see as the biggest challenges for people getting into this space, or companies getting into this space? Besides, of course, raising capital, which is everybody's, every startup's major issue, what are some of the other challenges, both on a hardware and software level, in really getting a foothold?
Well, I think from a financing viewpoint, the fact that there haven't been any comps of companies that have been acquired or made successful exits of some sort makes it a little harder
Aside
to
from
raise money.
Oculus.
Well,
Yeah, early on.
yeah.
Yeah.
Aside from that.
Yeah.
So that makes it a little harder to raise money, yet there's a lot of money flowing through the pipe, so it sort of balances out. I think we're still developing the enabling tools to allow people to do rapid development of VR environments. It's better than was last year, but there's still some work to be done there. But that's also an opportunity. So, I don't think there's any real. My biased perspective is that it's a wide open, unexplored continent with a lot of opportunity and not too many dangers.
No? Michael, what do you think? Opportunity, challenges, wide open, Wild West, take land grab?
Yeah, I think it's like a land rush again, like the internet was in the turn of the millennium. But I think the one thing that's different is it's just really, it's a horse race, and it's really hard to tell, who to place your bets on.
Interesting. Chris, how does HTC see this sort of horse race?
I mean, I think, again, we're all about trying to help the ecosystem develop, and so even from my standpoint, from a content standpoint, we have about 10 different verticals or more that we believe VR can really fundamentally transform the way experiences happen. And so those can range from education to healthcare to real estate, et cetera. But this is why we're actually doing things like we're actually helping to co-fund Field Vive Studios. We're actually doing the accelerator program. We even launched a VR for Impact fund, $10 million fund in conjunction with the UN back at Davos to help show that VR can do things for good, right? And so we're kind of putting our money where our mouth is. And we've also formed one more thing we've actually done, forgot to say, is we actually formed an alliance with a number of over 30 plus VCs across kind of the US and China called the VRBCA. And that has over, I believe, $14 billion in deployable capital. And every other month, they're actually looking at applications and getting pitches between Beijing and San Francisco. So again, we're doing a lot to try to drive the ecosystem, and hopefully that's helping. And I think we've seen such tremendous change in the last 11 months that we didn't even anticipate. So one of the opportunities and challenges is really kind of trying to figure out where the market's going to go. Nobody really knows. That's the navigation path, and nobody really knew where the internet was going back in the mid-90s when it started hitting kind of more the enterprise and consumer space. So we're kind of in a similar play here from that standpoint. But I would say just, if you can kind of think 2 steps ahead, stay focused, but also realize that you might need to pivot and recognize the trends that are emerging. So location-based, what Michael was talking about with the libraries, and we're seeing a lot of interest in getting VR into spaces, retail spaces, arcades, cinemas, IMAX theaters, et cetera. The rise of VR arcades is something we didn't really think about 3 to 6 months ago when we started seeing those trends, but then we thought, oh wow, now it's starting to really take hold.
What do you think has driven that? That is a very, very interesting. There were sort of rumblings about it for the last year, but it seemed very opportunistic. What do you think is really driving that concept of setting up arcades?
I mean, it's a number of different things, right? One is, if you talk about from the retail standpoint, it's the malls are finding it hard to attract people, right? So they're looking for something to attract people, and VR is doing that. And at CES, I went to the hotel. I just walked through a mall on the way during CES, and I saw a Vive set up in the middle of the middle of the mall with a line of 20 people there, paying I think they were paying $20 for 10 minutes of experience. And I was like, wow, maybe I should set my own kiosk.
I was going to say that's a great business model.
I saw one at a farmer's market recently.
Oh, really? Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, VR really is one of those things, is those of you who tried it, you really can't really understand it until you try it for yourself. So it's that one-to-one connection, and that's, I think, driving the growth of the VR arcades and VR locations and getting people in the door, because people want to try it out and experience for themselves. And once they try it, they really do like it.
Yeah. So this is really actually interesting. What are some of the sort of more unique applications that you have seen? I mean, we've been talking about the hardware, but what about the software and the applications themselves? I mean, what are some of the things that in your digital wanderings you've sort of noticed that really kind of stand out as unique ways to apply this technology?
I've got a quick list that
Oh, yeah.
I think I can recapitulate pretty fast. At least in the medical arena, almost every aspect of medicine is being impacted right now. Addictions, autism, Asperger's, stroke rehabilitation, physical rehabilitation, cognitive rehabilitation, nutrition and weight management, and adherence to clinical protocols. The list goes on. Every medical vertical has some basic research. And one of the things that's propelling this is we've had VR technology for many years now. So it's been in the laboratory and validated of how it can impact us clinically. And now we finally have a low-cost platform. And I should point out it's also a telemedicine platform. It allows us to reach into the home and help people with their if they're working on managing their diet, or if they're trying to motivate themselves to exercise, or if they're trying to learn how to manage their anxiety or their mood disorder. We can reach them where they are instead of having to go to a clinic. And that lubricates the whole process really fast. So for me, I think medicine is going to be one of the major verticals.
Michael, what have you seen that's
I think
really
for
cool?
education, it's about elusive places and things. Elusive places are places that you could never go if you're a student in Idaho, like the Metropolitan Museum in New York.
Great.
Or elusive places are the Jurassic era, where you can actually see what the plants and animals were like. You can go there. You can walk with dinosaurs, you know. Okay? Elusive things are, well, I did an interesting prototype of a taking blood from a dog's neck, because it turns out that's a very hard procedure for veterinary technicians to learn, and you're not going to get enough dogs to practice on, you know, because it's right next to the jugular, artery. So you make a mistake and you lose a dog. So you can practice on animals. You see what I mean? So anything you could think of that's part of learning, and we do mostly STEM objects, and as part of learning that you don't have ready access to, you can simulate in VR, and you can have a no-fault experience with it.
Wow, interesting. Chris, have you seen anything else that's...
I think, in terms of education, what I've seen in Beijing is, and I think some of you have seen this also, is a classroom where you have 30 seats, and they're actually kids in them all wearing Vive headsets, and they're all learning just kind of the way that Mike was talking about, in a very different setting, where you're essentially taking on these field trips, virtual field trips, and you can do things like potentially learn about physics and have a whole sandbox of physics objects in there for you to play with. So it really is somewhat up to, it's really limitless to your imagination in terms of the experiences you want to make. It can be ranging for, as Walter was saying, pain management, right? So people with veterans who have returned from the wars without their limbs, they have phantom limb pain, but there's ways they can actually mirror themselves, and neurologically they actually feel relief from that, from the pain of a lost limb. And I think just, again, from an empathetic standpoint, there's a lot of research being done about how being taken to those places and experiences in VR is much more visceral, it's much more meaningful and impactful in terms of how it affects your behavior than you would if you're watching a movie, or you're even seeing it, reading it in a book, for example. So it's a really tremendous amount of opportunities, I think, to really, again, transform the way we do things, whether it's working, living, playing. I mean, it runs the gamut.
It's interesting, and I just read an article about somebody who had developed a Death with Dignity app using VR, so that, a family and family members that are contemplating this within their family can sort of have the experience and understand what it means to go through that.
Well, the key word you just used was experience.
Yes.
And I think that's the underlying difference of this technology is it creates an experience as opposed to our Cartesian coordinates or three-act play way of learning and teaching and doing. We now have a way of having an experience where mistakes are free, where time can be expanded or contracted, where distance is no object and our creativity is let loose. And there are experiences as opposed to passively watching something. And that makes a big difference.
Oh, and it makes, again, from a cognitive standpoint, it actually makes a huge difference in brain-wise. I mean, your brain doesn't actually know the difference between a virtual experience and a real experience or in the outside world. So it has tremendous impacts upon what we can do when we don't believe we can do it.
Yeah, but you brought up something interesting by mentioning that about understanding the difference between a real experience and a virtual experience. We've done some research looking at how children at different age groups they sometimes have a difference between distinguishing between what's their imagination and what's reality. And there is a concern that with VR, there's bound to be parents who, because they work 3 jobs, park their kids in front of a VR system for extended periods of time. And we still don't know the effects on the developing neural visual system and proprioceptive component of that, of spending a lot of time in VR, especially for developing brain, and the issue of I think the technology is very powerful for teaching empathy for yourself and for the world and for other people, but it, just as violent video games are problematic, and there's this powerful technology can be used for a lot of great things, but it can also be used for things that aren't so great.
What are your feelings about the sort of potential addictive nature of the VR experience?
I think we're kind of, when the iPhone came out, right, and kids started playing with the iPhone, I think it was similar concerns. And you still see that. You see kids with their iPads or their tablets, and they're addicted. And you see adults, maybe in this room even, who are just looking at their phone the entire time, which is fine. But I think, I don't think our society has kind of crumbled from the iPhone.
Yeah.
And I was in video games for many years, and there was a lot of studies, I think, or people trying to debunk it as something that was going to incite violence, but there's never really been anything to prove that. So, there's early stages, and we're always very cognizant about that. And we want to make sure it's always going to be used as safely as possible. But as with anything, we can't necessarily control what content's out there. I mean, Google's having the same problem with YouTube and their advertisers right now. It's one of those things where people can take it wherever they want, right? And it's really kind of our responsibility as a society to try to keep it as reasonable as possible.
So shortly going to open this up for questions, but I would, given that we do have a number of entrepreneurs here and people who are contemplating the VR space as well, what about, what kind of pearls of wisdom, as far as either garnering investment or successfully commercializing, what is it that companies and entrepreneurs should keep in mind as they enter into this space?
For me, it's all about the channel. A lot of the younger startups that I work with they know technology very well, or they might know science or medicine very well, or they might know business pretty well. Rarely do I see all three, but even when they know all three, they haven't thought, who's my channel partner to get this out? And usually your channel partner they know the market, they can help you design your products better, they can help finance you, and they can help you with distribution when you're there. So my pearls of wisdom, to use your expression, is find that channel partner and reverse engineer from there.
Okay.
In education, I think the biggest mistake I've seen over the years with education technology companies is they really don't help the teacher, and they think somehow they're going to replace the teacher or they're going to go around the teacher. So yes, it's all about what you're going to deliver to the kid, but you have to be able to ask the question, how are you going to make the teacher's life better by making it possible for her not to do something she doesn't want to do, or to do something that she wants to do? And if you can answer that question, then whatever you're going to make for the kids will find its way to the kids.
sort of the teacher as the channel. Interesting.
I would say that fundamentally, and it's somewhat intuitive, but it's really about the business model. At least that's the way we look at things. So, I think you really need to have something very sound, and there's a temptation, obviously, to kind of go the way we did. I guess it's 15, 20 years ago now, where we were doing just try to get as many eyeballs going, and we'll worry about revenue models or profit models later, let alone revenue. And I think we've pulled back a little bit with the other recent crash we've had, but I think we're almost. I don't want to get back to that point again where people are thinking irrationally and just kind of banking it on an idea and a dream and a concept that's going to actually give you a path to profitability. So that again. And that's kind of putting my business hat on. But we do look at all our opportunities from that lens, from an investment and from a partnership standpoint. So I would agree, certainly on the channel partner side of things, and like I said, we're always welcome, open for business for talking to folks. But please come with a very sound business plan and be prepared to answer questions. Yeah.
And I would just say from the healthcare side, know the indication area that you're going after and the dynamics, both from a regulatory level and from an efficacy level. Not all technology and hardware is going to work as well for various indications. You don't want to put an autistic child in a very large headset. And if you're working with stroke rehab, or if you're working with the elderly, you also need to take into consideration what the limitations of movement and attention and everything else is. But very much like any other healthcare product development, the industry will only adopt it if there is that validation and those strong scientific underpinnings. So if any of you are interested in the VR, AR healthcare space, it's a similar pathway as you would have to take if you developed any other healthcare product. And so, do we have any questions out there? Oh, wow. Okay, well, let's start from the back and move back. Start from the front. Here we go.
So my basic question was, are you guys familiar with the void, that kind of space out there? So you mentioned a little bit about arcades. Do you see that kind of being more of a proliferation for this technology and getting attention for it? That kind of being its own, much like video games were, they were in an arcade, that's where the technology was. But these environments where they're painted, where you can actually go and touch things and be in a spaceship or be outside. Or do you see it more developing quicker through the home, where there are a lot of early adopters who are dedicating their living rooms to a specific 3D environment?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So for sure, both. I mean, we're seeing a lot of home adoption, but certainly in the arcade retail location-based space. And it may not be as extensive as the Void, although we know other companies are doing something similar to the Void, where it'll be kind of fully immersive and kind of their virtual world will mimic the actual physical maze or the room space you're in. But that's what you can also get at home. And the arcades are essentially going to be, I think, again, the great touch point and introduction to VR that a lot of people are really looking to do right now. So, thanks.
Great, thank you. Questions? Oh, yep.
So I want to ask the surprise question again, but in a slightly different way. If you backcast a year ago, as this industry was launching with the generation of hardware that's come out, what have you found surprising about, from today's perspective, looking back? Like, where did it go that you didn't expect that it would go? From like where you're getting traction with the hardware, or where did it go that you didn't expect it to go that you're getting traction now in applications that you're seeing many different folks develop?
Anybody want to take that? From the healthcare side, one of the most fascinating things is that all of the, originally when we started this, we thought, oh, well, kids or teens or whatever. Actually, within the healthcare industry, there seems to be tremendous interest from the payers and providers of Medicare and Medicaid. So, you know, the underserved populations, as well as the elderly. So it sort of was a little mind-blowing.
I think what surprised me pleasantly is all the money that flowed in. Chris mentioned that one large fund, but there's a huge amount of money coming from large companies, strategic partners, private investment groups. That surprised me.
Surprises?
For me, it was the librarians. I mean, I had 2 librarians from Stanford call me up and say, we want to do something with virtual reality. I mean, okay. You know, I would have thought it was the tech, you know, the geeks at the universities and the K-12 schools, but it's not. It's the librarians.
Yeah, I'd say also, I think the embrace by the enterprise companies. I mean, they've really, you know, been very much interested in bringing Vives and VR into figuring out how it's going to innovate faster, how it's going to cut costs, how it's going to allow them to collaborate and communicate, and how it's going to essentially help their businesses improve. So I think that's been more surprising to me than some of the other things out there. And also the tracker, because I didn't know the tracker was coming out until shortly before, but I thought that kind of opened up the ecosystem for a lot of, again, peripherals and hardware that, you know, people didn't really think about. So now there's a lot of excitement about that among the developer community, among, I would say, hopefully people in this room too, to see what can be done there, because, again, it's somewhat limitless.
Questions? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Very interestingly, we talk a lot about VR, but there is also AR. And my question is, I have the feeling that the holographic lens may represent a real big disruption. And I would like to have your opinion about
The
that.
Hololens. Yeah, the Hololens?
Well, I have to say that my perspective is that there's a spectrum of immersion and engagement and presence within these virtual environments. And the technology needs to be applied to the problem. I think the HoloLens is going to be very exciting right now because it's portable and you can walk around with it. It has good battery life relatively, and it's doing some great things. But it's just one example of that niche. And I think, from my viewpoint, there's some things I need full immersion to do, like post-traumatic stress, treating that. I need to block out the rest of the world. Same for addictions and some anxiety disorders. But for stroke rehabilitation, I want to see the room. I want to use the room. So I think it's for every niche, it's the same thing. I think it's probably a false dichotomy now we have right now, AR versus VR. I think we'll soon have sunglasses that allow us to do it all. And we won't have this phrase. And we probably won't have the phrase virtual reality or augmented reality at all. It'll just be how we interact with people, how we interact with information.
Well, I think we're out of time, unfortunately, because it sounds like you have a lot of burning questions, and so I think our panelists will be around for you to ask afterwards. I want to thank them so much, everybody here. What a fascinating, for me, discussion as well, to hear the latest and greatest, and thank all of you for participating.